Well, he got home about 8 o'clock in the morning and she was gone with the kids. They'd been married about 5 years, had 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. He figured she had gone to her mom's, who lived about 30 or 40 miles away, but he started texting her. Now, he knew they had been in an argument the night before and that she was upset, but he didn't think she would leave with the kids. So as he texted her all day long, she didn't respond. He sent over 200 text messages that day. Finally, she responded. She said, "Please stop texting me. We're fine." Well, he didn't stop. He kept texting her. "When are you coming home? When can I see my kids? Does this mean we're over?" Text after text after text. Finally, she texted again. "Stop texting me. This is harassment." And it was harassment. She could have him arrested and charged with harassment because she told him to stop and he didn't.
Wow.
He continued to text her. He could be the subject of an order of protection for harassment. That would affect his ability to see his kids. You know, guys, you got to be careful in these situations. Girls, too. If somebody tells you not to text them or call them, don't. Because if you keep on doing it, it could be harassment and you could be arrested.
Yo, what's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Coffee Pot. My name is Shusha Zed.
Drink the coffee, it'll make you feel better.
This is episode 4 of Divorce Stories featuring Lenley Richter. Shout out to Lenley, man. He's providing free game out here for men to put themselves in the best position if they are crazy enough to get married today, and also really making some men's decision to not get married more concrete, right? Check him out. I've got his TikTok pinned to the top comment. Without any further delay, let's get into it.
Something happened this weekend that made me madder than I've been in a long time. I represent the father of a 3-year-old little boy. The father happens to be in the United States Army stationed down in Texas. Well, he and the mom were living down there together until about 6 months ago when they got crossways. Mom moves back to Tennessee, where they're both from, and takes the little boy with him. Well, Dad's about to be deployed. He's going to be overseas for at least the next 9 months, probably longer. So he wants to see his son. Hadn't seen him in 6 months since they left Texas. Well, he calls me up. I call the other lawyer up. We work it out to where Dad's going to get up here about 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, pick his son up, have his son until 6 on Sunday. Then he's going to head back and then go overseas. Well, he gets here Saturday afternoon about 3 o'clock, goes to the door, kisses his little boy, talks to his little boy, gets him reacclimated to him, then asks Mom, "Hey, I need to get the car seat. Can I have it, please?" She says no. He said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "Get your own damn car seat. That's mine." "What are you talking about?" He said. "I paid for it. It came out of my money." She said, "I don't care. Get your own car seat if you want to see our son." He had to go to Walmart, lose about 2 hours of time with his son, buy a car seat, come back, pick his son up, and spend the rest of the time with his son.
Wow.
He was mad. I was mad. I called the other lawyer up and let him have it. What do you think about that? If my client wasn't going to be deployed, I'd probably file something in court Monday morning and try to get him custody of the little boy. What do you think about her behavior?
Terrible.
The 39-year-old father of a 10-year-old little boy developed a brain tumor. It had to be surgically removed. It was serious. There was some residual damage to his motor functions, damage to his speech, things that kept him from being able to be gainfully employed. Well, when he was first diagnosed, his parents were smart enough to know that he was paying child support under a court order, and if they didn't do something quickly to stop that child support from mounting up, it was going to continue to accrue. So they hired an attorney to go into court on his behalf and petition the court to stop the child support. Got a judge to issue a temporary order to stop it until it could be determined what his prognosis was. When they determined that, they were able to go into court and have child support stopped completely. By doing that, they kept all those arrears from mounting up. They kept there from being a contempt petition. They kept him from ending up possibly in jail, even though he was disabled. All of those things because his parents were smart enough to know that they needed to file something immediately. I was sitting in court the other day waiting for my case to be called. And the lawyer in front of me, it's a young lawyer, he had a case where the father of a 2-year-old child was trying to get custody of the child. Now, the problem that lawyer had with his client was that his client hadn't spent much time with the child since the child was born. It appeared that the mother and him lived together for maybe a short period of time after the child was born, but then he only saw the child a few times a month, and then the problem he had was he only saw the child during the day, no overnights. In the end, he didn't prevail. He was awarded every first, third, and fifth weekends of each month and alternating holidays. That's what we used to call standard visitation. You know, the courts in Tennessee, as in most states, are supposed to be gender neutral in determining custody of a child. The problem is in an initial custody determination, the father's going to be usually at a distinct disadvantage. The statute in Tennessee looks at 15 factors that the court has to weigh before deciding which parent is going to get custody. And one of those factors is which parent has performed most of the parenting responsibility. That's almost always going to be the mother in a situation like that. The other factors include things such as which parent has primarily provided the child with food, clothing, medical care, education, and other necessary care. And that's almost always going to be the mother of a young child. Other factors include the emotional ties that exist. Again, the mother will prevail on that. And probably the most important is who's been the primary caregiver of the child since birth. Again, that's almost always going to be the mother of a young child. That puts dads in that situation at a real disadvantage. Doesn't seem fair, does it? What do you think the solution is in that case? Dad was paying about $650 a month in child support for one minor child. The problem was that he and Mom lived in two different states. Mom lived in Tennessee, he lived in Florida. So the way they worked out the visitation and the parenting time was that the child would go down to Florida and be with Dad the bulk of the summer, about 2.5 months. Well, one summer the child went down there to be with Dad, and Dad decided on his own that he didn't need to pay child support when he had the child during the summer. Why should he have to pay Mom $650 when he had the child and he was having to feed, clothe, and shelter the child? That wasn't a good idea. Mom took him back to court for contempt. He was found in contempt. He had to pay that child support back. Fortunately, the judge didn't lock him up for contempt because he really didn't have the intent to violate the order. He just misunderstood. Well, here's the deal. Child support is set really on a yearly basis, and you pay that out every month. And it doesn't matter how many days in that particular month you have the child, you still got to pay that set amount every month. In this case, it was $650 per month. A couple came in to see me not too long ago, and they wanted to get divorced. They had everything worked out. They had written it all down. It was beautiful. They had divided up the property between themselves. They had divided up the parenting time, and they were going to get equal parenting time. Dad would have 1 week, Mom would have 1 week. Well, here was the problem. They put 0 on the paperwork for child support. They had both agreed that neither one of them should pay child support to the other because, after all, they've got equal parenting days. Why should child support even be considered? Well, here's the problem. In Tennessee, as in most states, child support is not only based on the number of parenting days each parent has, but also the relative income. In this case, Dad was making almost twice what Mom was making. And in accordance with the guidelines, he should be paying Mom about $700 a month in child support. Kind of doesn't seem fair if they've got equal parenting time, but I explained to him the judge is not going to approve your parenting plan without child support in accordance with the guidelines. Well, he got home about 8 o'clock in the morning and she was gone with the kids. They'd been married about 5 years, had 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. He figured she had gone to her mom's, who lived about 30 or 40 miles away, but he started texting her. Now, he knew they had been in an argument the night before and that she was upset, but he didn't think she would leave with the kids. So as he texted her all day long, she didn't respond. He sent over 200 text messages that day. Finally, she responded. She said, "Please stop texting me. We're fine." Well, he didn't stop. He kept texting her. "When are you coming home? When can I see my kids? Does this mean we're over?" Text after text after text. Finally, she texted again. "Stop texting me. This is harassment." And it was harassment. She could have him arrested and charged with harassment because she told him to stop and he didn't.
Wow.
He continued to text her. He could be the subject of an order of protection for harassment. That would affect his ability to see his kids. You know, guys, you got to be careful in these situations. Girls, too. If somebody tells you not to text them or call them, don't. Because if you keep on doing it, it could be harassment and you could be arrested. When the son was 16 and the daughter 15, they both came to live with Dad. Dad had been paying child support to Mom, but Mom was having some issues of her own and couldn't really deal with the kids, so she let Dad take them. They agreed among themselves that he didn't have to pay her child support as long as he had custody of them and took care of them. Well, the problem is there was no court order stopping child support. Well, Dad went on and raised the kids, didn't pay child support, even sent them to college, paid for their college tuition, as a matter of fact. They both graduated, did really well, have good jobs now. Well, move forward 9 years. The state takes Dad to court and says, "Hey, you owe child support for that time period you didn't pay when the kids were 15 to 18 years old. You got to pay it back. Not only that, but you got to pay the interest back as well. Dad argued, hey, wait a second, I raised these kids during that time period. Court said, too bad, you never went back and changed that order. What do you think about that? Do you think the state should allow Dad to go back and change the order and modify it retroactively? Or do you think Dad should be on the hook for the child support that he didn't pay, even while he had custody of the kids? Husband took $100,000 out of his 401k that he'd been saving for retirement and invested it in his wife's business. They were both hoping that that business would be successful and could generate enough money for them to retire. It didn't. It wasn't successful. It went belly up. He lost every bit of that $100,000. Well, the parties got divorced about 2 years later. He argued before the judge that he should get that $100,000 back. After all, that was his retirement account. And he invested in his wife's business, being good-natured, and the business failed. Now he wants that money back. The judge said, no, you're not getting that money back. That was a marital transaction. It occurred during the marriage. You invested that money knowing the risk. If the business had been successful and was worth $2 million now, you'd be wanting $1 million of it, and I would give you $1 million of it. You took the risk. You're going to have to suffer the loss. What do you think about that? Do you think the judge was right in that regard, or do you think he should have given the husband his money back? I was sitting in court not too long ago, and I was listening to two older lawyers, well-established lawyers, arguing a custody case before the judge. One of the lawyers stood up and said, you know, Your Honor, my client has allowed the father to see her child at least every other weekend since they've been separated, and even more. The other lawyer stood up and said, Your Honor, that's not true. She has not allowed him to see her child but maybe once a month, if that much. Finally, the judge said, guys, who are we talking about? Whose child is this? Is this a child of the marriage, or is this her child? Well, both lawyers said, well, it's a child of the marriage, Your Honor. To which the judge replied, then why are we referring to the child as her child and her giving him something? That's not the way this works. You know, there's a mindset that permeates the judicial system in child custody and visitation cases that somehow the mother is in charge of the parenting time and she gives the parenting time for father to him. That's not true. The judge kind of set him straight in that regard. But you know, that is a real problem in the judicial system, is that mindset that somehow the mother gets to dictate when the father sees the child. Rarely does a month go by that I don't get a call from somebody who has tried to do their own divorce and has messed something up and now needs a lawyer to go in and fix it. You know, I'm all for people doing their own divorce, especially if it's simple and there are no kids involved, there's no real property, and there are no retirement accounts. But if any of those three things exist, then I always suggest a person at least get a lawyer to look over the paperwork to make sure everything's done correctly. You know, you can mess up a deed and it can screw up your mortgage, screw up being able to sell that house later. You can mess up the division of a retirement account, and it might cost you tens of thousands of dollars in taxes and penalties if you haven't done it right. And of course, if you mess up a parenting plan, it can really screw your kids up. And it's hard to fix those things once they've been messed up. So if you've got any of those three things, it's probably best to consult the lawyer. But if not, feel free to do the divorce yourself. You know, most states, they have forms online that you can use to do your own divorce. There's something in the law called a presumption. A presumption simply means the law will take something as true, whether it's true or not. A good example of that would be if you're married and you have a child, then that child is assumed to be a child of the marriage. In other words, your husband is assumed to be the father of that child. It creates a presumption. We know that's not always the case. Sometimes he's not. And you can overcome that presumption by presenting DNA proof that he's not. Well, John found out the hard way about presumptions. He had married this girl, his high school sweetheart, after his first wife had died. About a year into that marriage, he deeded his house that he had owned for about 10 years to his new wife, deeded it to her and to him as a married couple. Well, about a year later, she filed for divorce. One of the issues in the divorce was whether or not that was marital property. Well, since he had deeded it to her, it created a presumption that it was marital property. And he could not overcome that presumption. And he ended up losing half the value of that house to her in the divorce. What do you think about that? Do you think presumptions in the law are a good thing? Or do you think we ought to have to prove everything? Dad was paying child support of about $500 a month for two kids from two different mothers. One of the mothers was getting about $200 a month, the other $100 a month. The reason why? One mother was making more than the other. The mother that was making less money got more child support. The one that was making more money got less child support. Well, Dad's hours had gotten reduced at his job, and so he was making less money. So he decided that he should be paying less child support. He petitioned the court on his own without a lawyer to reduce his child support for both children. Well, he got to court, and as it turned out, the mothers were also making less money. And as it turned out, he ended up having to pay almost $100 more in child support than he was before. You know, they say in the South, you shouldn't go stirring up a hornet's nest because you might get stung. In this case, he did. He got stung because he didn't take into consideration that they might be earning less money too. What do you think about that? Mom and Dad were the unmarried parents of a 6-year-old little boy. Mom was from North Carolina. She wanted to go back there from Tennessee, where she currently lived. She had family in North Carolina. She had looked for a job and found one. She had found an apartment. She had talked to the dad about it. He seemed to be okay with it, so she started the process. She rented the apartment, she closed on the job, and she told family, hey, we're coming. Everybody was excited. Then all of a sudden, right before it was time for her to leave, Dad served her with papers. And in those papers was an order from the court saying you can't move. The judge set a hearing 30 days out, but gosh, she had already signed for the apartment. She had been planning on moving that weekend. Here was the problem. Mom didn't follow the law. The law in Tennessee provides that if you want to relocate with a child and you have primary residential parent status, you've got to send a certified letter to the other parent letting them know that you want to move, where you want to move, why you want to move. And the important thing is that if they don't respond within 30 days objecting to the move, that you will be allowed to move. She hadn't done that. Well, the case went to trial, and the judge went ahead after trial and said you can move. It's in the best interest of the minor child. It worked out good in that situation. You know, every state's a little bit different. Every state has a law regarding the relocation of a child and what steps you've got to follow if you want to relocate. Relocation cases are tough. You're taking the child away from one of the parents who probably has been spending a lot of time with that child. In this case, it was going to work out okay, but it doesn't always work out that well. Dad was sent to jail until he paid a purge payment of $1,000. He found himself $3,000 behind in child support, and here was his excuse. It seems that about 6 months ago, when the final decree was entered and the parties were divorced, he had agreed to pay child support through the state. In this case, it was the state of Tennessee. Every state has a system where you can pay through the state. This happened to be Tennessee. What they would normally do is you would fill out certain paperwork telling them where you worked, who your employer was, and who the money was supposed to go to once they got it. And then the state would take that information, would send a wage assignment to your employer would deduct the money, send it into the state, and the state would disperse it to the other parent. But he never did that. And he knew he didn't do that. He knew the money wasn't coming out of his check. He knew he wasn't paying child support, but he didn't do anything about it. Folks, you got to be proactive in these situations. If you're supposed to pay child support through the state, you've got to take certain steps to make sure the state has the proper information. In this case, he hadn't done that, and he was sentenced to jail until he made a $1,000 purge payment.
Jesus.
And then he had to go ahead and fill out that paperwork. What do you think about that? You think that was a fair result?
I had a woman comment on one of these videos, divorce attorney videos, and she basically was like, man, I wonder what happens to women in divorce. I'm like, what? I was reading, I was like, what are you saying? And I guess what she meant is, do women get screwed over the same way that men get in divorce? And the answer to that question is no, they don't. Right? I've tried to find videos because I think they would perform pretty well. Number one, you guys would enjoy them. I've tried to find videos of women getting the short end of the stick in family court, and it's hard to find videos of those stories. I think Lenley has a few of them, and I put together something on that. It was like 10 minutes, right? A lot shorter, but I've got like over 5 videos currently, a few hours of content of just like divorce advice for men in specific, and also all these horrific stories of men going through terrible, terrible divorces. That's the reality, right? And so what happens to women typically in divorce is the opposite of what you're hearing happens to men. That's the answer to that question. Listen, I hope you guys got something out of part 4 of divorce stories, make sure you leave a comment down below to let me know that you enjoy these and want more of them. I appreciate you guys for checking out another episode of The Coffee Pod. Till next time, I'm out. Peace.